first document I'm going to present, and I would like to tell you how we are going to address this meeting today. As you can see, or as it was just said by our communication colleague, Flora Partenio, you can see here at the bottom of your screen, you can choose the interpretation or translation. This is being recorded and it's going to be uploaded to our school, to the Dawn platform, so that you will have access to it in the future, to the suggested readings that we suggested throughout these days, so that you can go deeper into the topics that you want. Translation as well, it will be available in English and Spanish. We have great colleagues from Abra Palabra Cooperative who have already worked with us in the previous seminar. So any questions you may have, you can write it in the chat box in our backstage. They are not with like cameras off, but we have Tasmi in the Dominican Republic in the communication team from Dawn, and she made all this possible. So we are learning together with you. I mean, many of the tools that we need nowadays in order to facilitate these kind of meetings and the school. Victoria Agosto from Uruguay, a feminist who also works together with Corina Rodríguez, and Flora Partenio, who is also a member of the board of Dawn in Argentina, a feminist and very famous in our countries, in our region. So they're going to be taking down notes about anything that may come up during the seminar. You will not have the possibility to open up your mics because of the dynamics of the Zoom webinar, but you can introduce yourselves through the chat box. And if you have any questions in terms of, well, I don't know, things that may come up or questions that you might feel are relevant, you can write them down in the chat box, and my colleagues, Flora and Victoria, will be taking down notes of them. So first of all, then again, I would like to ask my colleagues if everything is okay so that I can share my screen. What I'm going to do now is to share a video, and I hope this will act as a trigger for further debate. Following this video, I will give the floor formally to Corina and then to the rest of the panelists. So let me share my screen with you. Just bear with me for 1 minute. This is the first time I'm trying to share my screen. And my computer is working a bit slow today.
Perdón, que voy a hacerlo un poco más.
Let me try. Can you actually see my screen? No, Ale, we cannot see it. Just click where it reads share screen, and then, oh, okay. Is it better? Yes, now yes. Oh, okay, good. So let me go back because this video goes quite fast. Okay, so let's wait for everyone to be ready. The translators ready as well? There's no audio in the video. That's why we are not translating. Let me tell Alejandra. Okay, so this was just a way to start, to open up, and to present some images as well so that you can see what this debate is all about. So that video that we were playing was created by TNI, Transnational Institute, that is an active member of the campaign, which is actually a global campaign for the binding treaty. So now I will. Oh, now I'm reading that you couldn't hear the video audio. Oh, I'm just reading those comments now. Um, okay, yes, don't worry. The video is. I'm so sorry. I was not looking at the chat while the video was playing. But anyway, okay, so I hope that at least you could see the videos, and the videos were the images were quite telling, at least, of the issue that we are going to address today. It's very much focused of the transnational companies. But now let's continue. I will give the floor to Corina Rodríguez, who is an expert in these topics and working not only in Argentina, but in the whole region. So you can get to know more about her if you read her biography, her bio in our website. But anyway, let's not wait any more time. I'll just give the floor to you so that you can give us a more macro vision of corporate power, what it is all about, what happens in terms of the global economy, and what is the impact that it has on the labor rights mainly. Then we will open up the floor and continue with the rest. Thank you, Corina.
Thank you, Ale. Good morning, good night, good evening, everybody. Well, the video did not have audio, but it had subtitles. And I think that you may have perceived how the video was telling about the growing power of corporations, this evidence that the volume and the size of certain transnational corporations measured by their turnouts, it's greater than the GDP than most of the countries of the global south. And I think that this can be a feature of financial capitalism, global financial capitalism of this stage we're living through. And we reached here through a deregulation process, which started in the 80s and it's becoming worse. And it's also a recoil of the state. There are two trends that are given simultaneously, and these two processes of deregulation and the technological advances in terms of transport and communications allow this offshoring of production and the confirmation of these global teams of productions in which capital starts moving around the world and they start looking for the most advantaged positions in each of the places. And this process is given together with a recoil of the state, which abandons people with this paradigm of neoliberalism. And it proposes that it's a market what drives the economy, and then the state is inefficient, that it should not promote economy, that it has no capacity for innovation, that it's corrupt. And this speech, which is very enrooted, leads to these processes of privatization and mercantilization of practically all of the dimensions of our lives, together with this process of concentration of powers, of capitals in great corporations, the recoil of the state. And we have this process of privatization and mercantilization of multiple dimensions of lives, and some of most human rights depend on their guarantees and depend on the people and their capacity to participate in those markets and their capacity to produce monetary income. And because of the gender gaps, we know women are behind in these possibilities and we cannot participate in those market exchanges. And this process, I think, is evident as life starts becoming good. We have the care which sustains life and the system as well. This is our focus from this feminist economy perspective. This process of economic power concentration leads us to the deepening of the process of definization of states. These difficulties that the state has to finance provision gives room to these transnational companies that promote the lowering of all standards. One of them is the tax standards, where states start to compete among themselves in order to attract these capitals or these investments in order to finance development policy and to development of the countries. But also we have the lowering of these environmental and labor standards, this power concentration and the weakening of the states. Leads us to the reduction of these three levels of standards: tax, labor, and environmental standards, which are expressed in the situation in which we reach this pandemic juncture. And what I would like to state as well is that this process was possible because of the weakening of global governance. And these should protect and control this flow and the abuses that derive from these concentration processes. So that is how we reach to this situation where the private sector becomes more powerful than the states itself. The governance at the state level and at the regional level doesn't allow us to regulate them. And however, the state appears as the warrantor of the system. We saw it in the 2008 crisis when this crazy standard of global capitalism led the bubble to explode, and there were the states, the ones that rescued part of these private sectors. And I think that today we are facing a new example in that sense when we see this pandemic crisis. In spite of the great concentration of power of the private sector, during this juncture, such as the one we are living, these states are the ones who rescue the people, but also the companies and the system itself. And I think that this is shown, this is evidenced in the type of aid packages that states develop. It tries to attend to the sanitary crisis, but also the economic crisis that derives from the sanitary crisis itself. And I think that we should highlight this notion because it makes some matter worse. The states, in order to face the crisis and in order to implement these aid packages, they do great fiscal efforts. They use different financial mechanisms, but also for the countries of the global south, the effort that states are doing in policies to attend to the crisis and policies that try to start with an economic recovery after the crisis leads to fiscal efforts that derive in some cases in great indebtedness. So we can be facing a scenario where we can live through debt situations again, and it also leads to several tax reductions processes, and in order to do this, in some countries we have these recurrent actions of tax reduction. So we deepen this asymmetry between the states and the corporate sectors, where states need to call upon the private sectors in order to contribute to the recovery of the situation. And the pandemic is opening an opportunity to expand the businesses of the private sector, even in the provision of certain basic public services. We saw that when we looked at private-public partnerships, where we have sectors of provision of sanitary and education services, and we think that this scenario deepens these trends. And the companies also leverage this situation, and I would like to state three important aspects. One has to do with this crisis weakens labor conditions, even though certain governments establish regulations in order to avoid dismissal and to avoid the reduction of salaries. That is happening. Companies are taking advantage of these crisis situations, and there are massive layoff situations, and the companies also are leveraging these contexts in order to require compensation by the states. And some of the rescue policies have to do with rescue to companies with the based on the grounds that supporting the companies means supporting salaries. The truth is that there are income transfers from the states to the companies that doesn't lead to the protection of those jobs and of those salaries. And the other aspect has to do with the acceleration of businesses of some sectors, in particular stay home, telework, have accelerated the expansion of technological companies, the expansion of telework and platform jobs in a very big scale, and the dimension of telework that has to open a window of opportunity for companies that provide services related to the maintenance of this structure. It's a trend that was already happening but has accelerated during this crisis, and the facts have been happening, especially in the countries from the global south. There is no adequate regulation. This regulation has been slow as in relation to the acceleration of expansion of telework, and this also leads us to greater attention in relation to care work as well. And the opportunity that the private power is finding has to do with the weakening of labor rights, of a weakening of the care rights as well, and the intensification of time and the work of women in order to sustain care work and non-remunerated work. So we think that it's key to insist on this topic in the feminist agenda. It's not a topic on which we are starting to work just now, but we have been working on these topics for a long time. We have been producing evidence, and in order to wrap up, I will say this quickly because I know my colleagues will deepen on this. The agenda of the feminist movement, I think that has to do with use our creativity in order to resist, because traditional ways of resistance are quite stuck in this context of a pandemic. But apart from that, this has been added up to a process of weakening of democracies, the restriction of spaces for the participation of civil society and active resistance. And I think that these spaces, these forums, are used for this, was to think collectively how we can face and how we can resist this concentrated power. I think that it's important to systematize the evidence of what has been happening and how it is being deepening. My colleagues will mention certain specific cases, and I think that we have to make our efforts in order to systematize all the evidence. And I think that at a territorial and regional level, I think it's very important the articulation of resistance. So I think this encounter is very important within the context of Transformative Economic Forum. I think this articulation between human rights movements and feminist movements are key in order to strengthen our resistance. The alliances with other movements is also important. And at a global scale, we should deepen our resistance in the spaces that are enabled to us. We are participating on a binding agreement in the framework of the United Nations. It is going quite slow. We celebrate the fact that the process is in existence. I think that delimits our possibilities. Unfortunately, I think that we try to bet on these processes, and we try to bet on the feminist justice, gender justice. And I think that we should resist the institutions that monopolize the regulations that do not regulate the power of concentrated capital. And they also enable lawsuits of private company against the states. This mechanism of dispute between investors and the states should be confronted by the multiple visions of social movements and feminist movements. I would leave it here, Ale, and we could go on the dialogue. Thank you, Corina. You could summarize it very well and give us a global aspect to summarize what is happening in the territories and what is happening at a global level. And this forum makes this visible, this aspect, what is happening in Catalonia, what is happening in Guatemala, in Malawi, in the different struggles, have a common struggle, and corporate power have been impacting on different collectives. And what you were saying, this necessity to systematize what is happening with this promise of the future of the work and this digital opportunity. And I think there are there is evidence that can dispute this narrative. It was brilliant the way in which the two dialogues were joined. Just to reiterate some logistics aspects, I saw that many people introduce themselves in their chat. I ask you to introduce yourself. I see several feminist movements that were against G20, people from different regions, and I think that translation has made things easier. And you can place your questions in the chat box or in the Q&A chat. And now, with this starting point of the video and this global analysis of juncture, I will give the floor to Fernanda Hopenhaym. She can speak briefly with us, and I'm going to introduce herself. she's Uruguayan or Mexican. She can clarify her citizenship. So she has been studying in feminist movements, social justice and gender. She has great experience because she has worked in poder in questions of transparency and accountability of companies, and the follow-up to companies and financial institutions. And she had also made a follow-up of regional and global debates. Poder is a Don ally in other agendas. We've been together against G20. We are allies in this binding treaty agreement, and she's also a member of the ESCR network, and she will speak about the corporate capture, and she will go deep into some aspects. Now I'm going to share a video. I hope you can hear the audio this time. Now I'm going to share the screen.
There's no sound in this video. I think Alejandra is trying to solve it.
Se escucha incluso con mayor fuerza, porque este problema es más grande que nuestra comunidad.
Because this problem is bigger than our community. Okay, starting over. The mining company promised us work, development, and economic growth. Some of us got some jobs, but life became more complicated with less control on our daily routine. Shortly afterwards, our baby got sick, and it seemed that he was not going to get any better. And we weren't the only ones getting sick. We had to get to the bottom of this issue, so I found a complex story involving leaders, parliamentary members, and businessmen who worked together and didn't hesitate to change any law that stood in their way. This problem overwhelmed me. I realized that I had to join other voices to make my voice heard. They listened to me and tried to silence me, to hush me. And I felt hopeless because the doctors, the politicians, the police, everyone think that the company was only trying to help. Thanks to a network of human rights defenders, I regained my freedom, and thanks to it, my voice is heard even louder, because this problem is larger than our communities, not just a question of this mining company that is destroying our community, our health, and our lives. This is how they operate. And how is it that the people who are supposed to represent us started defending the company and convincing us that we should trust them too? It's a complex story, but one thing is clear. The profits of the company are considered more important than our own lives. So how do we do to fight in order to prioritize people over profits? The human rights community has begun using the term corporate capture to refer to a tendency, the trend of companies to take over our democratic institutions that implied such a hard work. Corporate capture occurs when companies manipulate our local governments for their own benefit. It happens when politicians favor businessmen who financed their campaigns over the people they must represent. It happens when former officials, elected officials, go to work at the companies that they regulated, or when private company employees are appointed to public offices. As corporations understand the power that we have as a community, they invest their resources to convince us that they are socially responsible companies. Practically the same as what happened here. The mining company opened a community hospital and donated medicines to distract us and to prevent us from discovering that they are contributing to causing our diseases. All this is corporate capture. Together, we must begin to expose corporate capture and to demand that our governments honor their obligations and protect our rights. Do you think you've seen cases of corporate capture in your community? Share your story by responding this short survey, and the video was cut.
Hola, bueno. ¿Me escuchan?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Volví a tener mi sonido.
Okay, so I think my sound is back, right? Okay, great, great.
Fernanda, creo que
Okay, Fernanda, so I think well, the video was clear, right? This is one of the dimensions, one of the aspects that Corina was talking about. And with your experience, more than 20 years of experience in the region and being part of the organization that created this material, this video, so I give the floor directly to you so that you can expand on this
Muchas
concept.
gracias, Ale. Buenos días
Thank
a
you,
todas, a todos, a
Alejandra. Good
todes, o
morning to
buenas tardes, donde
everyone,
se
or good
encuentren.
afternoon, evening, wherever you are
Sí,
located.
justamente mi pregunta un
Yes,
poco
as a matter of
para
fact,
comenzar a platicar con
my
ustedes tiene que
question to
ver con
start talking
por
to you
qué
would be, why
sucede esto que Corina nos estaba
does
comentando,
this
¿no? ¿Cómo
happen?
es
What
que
Corina was telling us
llegan
before as
las
well.
empresas a
Why
acumular tantísimo poder y
companies can
tantísimo
accumulate
capital?
so
Y
much
sobre
power, so
todo,
much
¿cómo es que los
capital?
estados
And how
fallan en
come
regular?
that states
Fallan en
cannot
su rol
regulate
como
it? They do
últimos
not.
garantes de los
They are not
derechos
the
y de las
ones to
democracias.
ensure
Y eso
rights,
es
people's
justamente
rights
por el
and
fenómeno
democracies.
llamado captura
That's because of the
corporativa.
phenomenon
A mí
that
me
we
gusta
call
usar más el
corporate
término
capture.
captura del Estado,
I
porque
usually
esto
say
implica que
state capture
hay un
or
poder
government capture
exacerbado
because
de
it shows
privados, del
an
capital
exacerbated
privado, que está interfiriendo de manera
power
indebida en la vida pública,
of
en nuestras
private
democracias,
capitals or
en el
private hands
funcionamiento
that is
mismo
having
de
an
nuestros
impact on
estados.
the
No
state or the
necesariamente
way
son
we live.
corporaciones,
It's not
aunque
necessarily
sí,
corporations. I
definitivamente,
mean, yes, at the end of the
legalmente
day, they are,
incorporadas, legalmente
and they are
estructuradas,
maybe
sino
structured
también
as a
otros
corporation or
poderes
as a company, but there are also
económicos
other economic
muy
powers
fuertes
that are
como
very
el
strong
crimen
indeed,
organizado, etc.
such
Entonces,
as, I don't
la,
know, these kind of
la
large
noción de captura del
organizations.
Estado es
So
un
the
poco más
notion
amplia. A
of
veces también
state
hablamos de captura
capture is a bit
corporativa del
wider.
Estado.
Sometimes we
Y
talk about
esto es algo
corporate
en lo que me
state
gustaría
capture. But
centrarme en
anyway,
este
I would like to
ratito que me
focus on
toca para
this
compartir
in the
con
few minutes that
ustedes.
I have here today
Este
to share
concepto de
with you.
captura del Estado
This
fue
concept of state
nombrado tal
capture
cual por primera
was
vez
mentioned
en el año
for the first
2000
time,
por
and
dos
was
economistas del
coined
Banco
in the year
Mundial,
2000 by
Daniel
two
Kaufman y
economists, Daniel
Henneman,
Kaufman
no me acuerdo el
and
nombre de pila,
Hillman. I actually can't remember his
y
name, but
se
well, from the World
basó en
Bank,
un estudio muy
and it was
profundo
based
del
on a
caso de
deep
Indonesia con el
study
dictador
of
Suharto, que
Indonesia
estuvo
with
31 años
Suharto, the
entre el 67 y el
dictator who
98
was
al
31
frente
years in
del país
power,
y
leading the
que
country.
colocó, digamos, a
And this,
sus familiares
I mean,
que
he
en distintos
appointed
lugares de la función
some
pública, que
relatives
dio
in different
paso
parts of the government,
al enorme poder de las
and this
corporaciones a
gave
que
way to
de
a
alguna manera
large amount of
ocuparan
power for
funciones o
corporations
servicios del
because they
Estado,
covered
pasó por un
functions that
proceso
used to
profundo de
belong to the state.
privatización,
So there was a
etcétera.
large
Entonces eso
privatization process,
habilitó a un
and this
crecimiento
enabled
enorme del
a
capital en el
large
país y del
growth of
poder del capital
capital
y además
in the country and
desarrolló
the
toda esta
power
dinámica de
embodied by the capital.
capitalismo de amigos, o como
And
decimos en
it that also brought about
Y
clientelism,
este es un
or
problema
let's say
estructural muy
patronage, or
profundo, que es
working
el
with
que
friends and with
actualmente de
relatives.
alguna manera,
This is
al menos
something
desde la lente desde la que
that,
trabajamos en
from
Poder y
my
yo
point of
misma,
view,
está
my
determinando
opinion,
cómo
those who work
funciona
with
el
me, is
capitalismo
determining how
en el
capitalism
que estamos
works,
viviendo y muchos de los fenómenos que Corina
and
estaba
many
describiendo en su
of
presentación.
the
A
phenomena
su
that
vez,
Corina was describing as well.
en la Red Desk,
In Red Desk,
cuya mesa directiva presido, como comentaba
I'm the
Alejandra,
leader of that organization, as
tenemos un
Alejandra was
grupo de
saying
trabajo
before.
sobre el
We
tema de
have a
captura
group of
corporativa,
work
desarrollamos estos videos que están en varios
dealing
idiomas, luego
with
los
this
compartimos su
kind
link.
of corporate capture or state
Y
capture. We
pudimos
have made
identificar,
many of these
basados en los
videos. I can
casos
share
que
the link with you.
observábamos de
And we observed
organizaciones
and analyzed
integrantes de
some
la red
cases of
de
organizations
comunidades
that were
locales de
part of our
personas en el
network,
territorio defendiendo los derechos
local
humanos,
communities, people who
que
were defending their
observaron y
human rights,
documentaron cómo
who
se
saw
despliega esta
and
captura del Estado,
documented
cómo se
the state
comportan
capture, what
las
was, let's
corporaciones
say, the
frente
behavior
a
of
los estados
corporations in
y
terms of
cómo se
how
manifiesta
they
esta captura.
reacted
Y desarrollamos
with the
o
state,
identificamos,
how the
describimos
capture was
distintas
conducted.
manifestaciones.
And we
Son 8
described
hoy en día
different
las que
manifestations
tenemos
of them. We have
documentadas.
8
Por un lado está la
cases documented
interferencia
so far.
en la
So you
toma de
have the
decisiones públicas,
interference
sobre todo a nivel
in the
legislativo
decision
y a
making
nivel
from
del
a public
ejecutivo,
point
es
of
decir, de
view,
política
executive
pública,
power,
y ahí
legislative
podemos
power.
identificar
And
distintas
there we can
formas
identify
de
different
esta
ways
interferencia en
of
política pública y de esta
interference in the
interferencia
public policy
legislativa.
or
El
in the
lobby, por ejemplo, puede
legislation
ser una,
process.
si bien está regulado en
Lobbying,
algunos
that can
países y
be
es
one.
legal,
It is regulated in some
y
countries and
vale
it
la
is
pena decir
legal.
que
And
esta
it is
captura
worth
no
saying that
necesariamente
this capture
incurre en la ilegalidad, sino más
doesn't
bien se
necessarily
acomoda
mean that
dentro
it
de las
is
estructuras
illegal. It
legales
is
o
somehow
legaloides
it
de los
adapts to these
estados donde opera
pseudo-legal structures of state,
y tiene que ver justamente con tratar
and
de
it
que
is
las reglas de
related
juego
to
se hagan a
trying to
modo de que
make the rules of the
faciliten el
game
crecimiento y la
in
acumulación del
such a way
capital.
that they can
Y
encourage the accumulation of
incluye la
capital.
política impositiva, la
So it
política
includes
monetaria,
tax
distintas
policy,
legislaciones que
monetary
regulan temas
policy,
ambientales,
legislation
temas de
regulating environmental
inversión,
issues, investment
etcétera,
issues,
¿no? Entonces, esa
among
es una
others,
manifestación.
many others.
Otra
So this is
manifestación es la
one kind of
interferencia en el poder
manifestation. Another one
judicial.
is the
Ahí
interference
también
in
vemos
the
desde la
judicial
compra
power,
de
in the
jueces
legal area.
hasta cuestiones
Bribing
procedimentales.
judges,
Cuando litigamos
procedural
contra empresas,
things.
por
For
ejemplo, en
example,
nuestra
when you file a
experiencia,
lawsuit against a company,
observamos que
you can
hay
see
muchas dificultades para que esos
that there are a
casos
lot of
avancen,
difficulties for those cases to actually
amenazas a
advance,
jueces, es decir,
threats
distintas
to
también
judges,
formas
or
de
let's say different
interferir
ways to
en el funcionamiento de los
interfere
sistemas de
in the
justicia en
normal
nuestros
functioning
países.
of the law in our countries.
Otra de las cuestiones clave tiene que ver con la puerta
Another key
giratoria que
issue
veían ustedes en el
is
video, que personas
the,
del
let's
mismo
say,
sector económico, vamos a
the
decir
way
así,
in which
pasen de la
people
función pública a trabajar en las
go
empresas que antes regulaban o
from
viceversa,
the state to
pasen
the
de las
companies
empresas
that they
a
regulated before, or
tener
they go
funciones de
from the
reguladores,
companies to
por ejemplo,
being
eso pasa mucho en
public
las
officials
empresas
as
de
well.
energía, petroleras,
This
etcétera,
happens a lot
que pasan a estarlo con los
in
ministerios de
the
energía o
oil
viceversa, y allí hay,
industry,
digamos, desde tráfico de influencias
and there
hasta
is a traffic of influence,
lleva y
there
trae de
is
información privilegiada,
a coming
etc.
and going of information, let's say private information.
Y
So it's a kind of
facilidades para
revolving door, as we call
participar de
it.
las licitaciones
Facilities
públicas,
to
etcétera,
participate in
etcétera.
public biddings or public
Hay cuestiones que tienen que
tenders.
ver con la privatización de los
There are a lot of
servicios y cómo
things
las
related to
empresas están
privatization
ocupando
of
funciones que eran del
services
Estado, por
and
ejemplo, de los servicios de
how the
seguridad,
companies
educación,
become or
salud,
are in
etcétera.
charge
Esa
of
podría
health
ser otra
issues, for
forma
example,
de manifestarse
security
esta
or safety
captura.
issues.
La
So that's
diplomacia
another way in
económica,
which
que
you
es la
can
forma
tell
en
that there is
que
a state capture,
las
and
empresas y sus
also the way
lobistas
in
también
which
están
companies
en los
and
espacios
their
tanto nacionales como
lobbyists are
internacionales
interfering
donde se
in
toman
national and
decisiones
international areas
sobre
where decisions are made
temas económicos o temas de
about economic
regulación a
topics
las
or
empresas. Pasa en
regulatory
la
topics
ONU,
in
por ejemplo,
companies.
o
It
pasa con
happens in
las
the
embajadas
UN,
que
it
protegen la
happens in the
inversión de
embassies
sus
that
empresas en
protect
los países donde están
investment of their own
asentadas.
companies in other countries.
La captura también
Capture
de la ciencia o la
also
interferencia en procesos
happens
de la ciencia. La
in
vemos mucho con la crisis
science.
climática, ¿no?
With the
Y
climate
cómo
change, for
ciertas
example, we can
empresas,
see it
sobre todo
because
las grandes
several
contaminadoras,
companies,
¿no? De
the large
petróleo, de gas,
polluters, oil,
tienen,
gas
también
companies,
financian
they
investigaciones,
also
financian estos llamados
finance
think tanks,
research,
centros de
or they
investigación,
finance the
que
think
luego
tanks, the
generan una
so-called
evidencia
think tanks
pseudocientífica o
that create
paracientífica para, de
pseudo-scientific
alguna manera,
evidence later on
defender
so that they can
que
defend
sigan operándose con combustibles
their
fósiles, etcétera.
operations, for
Y
example,
una
with
de las
fossil
cuestiones
fuels.
clave
And one of the key
tiene
issues
que
as
ver con la
well
captura de las
is related
narrativas, ¿no?
to
Muchas
the
veces hemos escuchado
narrative
que el modelo
capture,
de desarrollo
narration capture. Because
extractivista
we've heard
del
the
foco
narration
que
of the
desplaza poblaciones que
extractivist
explota
model, the
o
exploitation
sobreexplota
model, or
bienes
over-exploitation, I
naturales,
should say, for natural
es el modelo de
resources,
desarrollo prevalente y es al que
that's
tenemos que
the
apostar,
prevalent
y
model
quienes
that we need to
estamos en
bet
contra
on.
de ese
And
modelo
those who are
y
against that
quienes
model,
defienden los derechos
and
humanos
those
en
who
el
defend
territorio
human rights in
y
the
al medio ambiente,
territories or the
al
environment
agua,
for
la
that matter,
tierra, el territorio, la
water,
vida,
land,
están en
soil,
contra del desarrollo como
that we
tal,
are
¿no? Entonces, toda
against
esta narrativa es
development.
bastante
So
peligrosa
this
y es
narration, this
parte de los
narrative is
procesos
quite
de
dangerous
captura
indeed, and it is
corporativa.
part of the
Capturar
corporate
estas
capture
narrativas y
processes
hacer
as
que
well.
estas sean las
They take
narrativas
hold of these
dominantes,
narratives, of
vamos a
this
decir así.
rhetoric,
Entonces, en
and they
América
make their
Latina,
own
el
the
contexto que
prevailing
tenemos
one.
ahora, sobre
In
todo
Latin America,
en
the
la
context
COVID,
that we
en
currently
la
have,
pandemia por
mainly
COVID,
during the
y
pandemic,
esto
the
se puede
COVID-19
expandir
pandemic,
obviamente a
but
nivel
of course
global.
this
Mis
can be
ejemplos sobre todo tienen que ver con la
extrapolated at a
región, porque es
world
la región
level.
donde
It's not
trabajo
only our
y
region, I'm
donde
just
vivo.
mentioning examples of my region because it's
Tienen que
where I
ver
live and
con
where I work,
facilitar
but they are
aún más,
related to
algo ya lo mencionaba Corina, el desarrollo
facilitating,
de estas
Corina said this
empresas y la
before, the
operación de estas
development of these
empresas, ¿no?
companies.
Y tengo algunos ejemplos
And
concretos de
I
cómo
have
esta
some
captura
concrete
se ha
examples of how this
manifestado
capture has
en el
been
contexto de la pandemia. Una
manifested
cuestión
during the
clave que
pandemic.
vale la
Something
pena
key that
resaltar
is worth
tiene que ver
pointing
con
out
que a la vez
is
que,
that at the
digamos,
same
millones de
time,
personas van a
while
ser
millions of
empujadas
people will be
a la pobreza en
pushed
América Latina
towards poverty in Latin
en este
America
próximo año, ¿no?
in the
37% de la
next few
población de la
years,
región va a pasar
37%
a
of the
vivir
population in the
en
region
total
will start
bajo la
living
línea de pobreza, digamos que es una
under the
visión
poverty
más
line.
común,
That's the, let's say, the
internacionalmente
widespread
reconocida para estas estadísticas, por lo
calculation or
menos,
estimate that is done
a partir de la pandemia. Mientras eso
for the
sucede,
pandemic,
¿no?
I mean, and
Mientras
as this
96
happens,
millones de personas
while
más a nivel
96
global
million
van a
people at
pasar
a
a vivir en
global
pobreza
level will
extrema
start
con
living in
menos de
extreme
1.9
poverty with
dólares
less
al
than
día, de las
$1.9
cuales
per
47
day,
millones van a
out of
ser
which
mujeres.
47 million will be
A la misma
women.
vez que pasa eso, entre
And at
marzo
the
y
same
agosto
time
de
that this happens
2020, Jeff
between March and
Bezos,
August
el
2020,
principal
Jack Bezos,
el dueño y
the
presidente
leader
de
or the
Amazon,
owner of Amazon,
plataforma que muchos
a
y muchas
platform
usamos
that
en este
many of
contexto
us
justo para no salir
used
de casa,
mainly during this
ha
context to
incrementado
stay
su
at home.
riqueza, es el
He has
billonario
increased.
número uno del
He's the
mundo,
billionaire
en
number
76
one
mil millones
billionaire
de
in the
dólares
world.
de
He
marzo
increased
a
his
agosto, ¿no?
profits
Según la
in
revista Forbes.
$76
Esa
billion
altísima
from
concentración
March
de la
to
riqueza le
October.
permite a una
So
persona
that
como Bezos y una
concentration of
empresa como
wealth
Amazon
allows
capturar
this man to
distintas
capture
esferas de la
different
vida pública en
spheres
distintos
of
países
public
donde opera.
life in different
Por otro
countries
lado,
where
otro
he
ejemplo
operates.
concreto tiene que ver
Another
con la
concrete
declaración
example
de
is also
sectores
related to
esenciales.
the Declaration of Essential
En México, por
Sectors.
ejemplo,
In
hubo
Mexico, for example, there was
una incidencia muy fuerte de
a
ciertos
very strong
sectores para que se
impact
reabrieran.
of
Por ejemplo, el sector minero fue
some
declarado como sector
some
esencial muy
areas to be
tempranamente cuando
opened up.
estábamos
The mining sector, for
en el
example,
pico de
was
contagios en
released or
México.
considered essential when
El
we were at
sector
the peak
refresquero y
of
cervecero también, un poco
infections
por la
in
demanda de los
Mexico. The
consumidores,
beer
pero
sector as
mucho
well,
por
brewery companies as
la
well.
capacidad de
It was because of
influencia,
a
la capacidad
demand on
de
the one
influencia
hand, but
muy,
also
muy
because
profunda
of
que
the
tienen en el
advocacy
Estado.
power that they
Por
have, or the
supuesto, como decía
influence
Corina
power that they
también,
have
todo
on
el
the
sector
state.
de
And as
trabajo de
Corina was saying
plataforma,
before,
de
working on
envíos, de
platforms,
tecnología, ¿no? Todo en
deliveries,
esta virtualidad
technology, all
también
that implies the
en
new
su
virtual
poder, ha
world.
crecido en su
It has
capital
grown a
acumulado, en su
lot. It
capital
has accumulated
y
even more
también en su
capital
influencia. Los
and
paquetes de rescate
increased
económico que en
its
los países
influence.
estaban
The economic
preparando o
relief
negociando,
measures
cuando el
that
gran
were
capital realmente
negotiated
no
when
necesita
the
ser rescatado,
largest
ya lo
amount of
vimos en
capital
el
doesn't
video y
need
también lo
any
comentó Corina,
rescue. Corina mentioned this as
que
well, and we saw
de
it on
las
the
100 economías más
video.
grandes del mundo, más de
Out of
60
the
son
100
empresas, ¿no? El gran
economies,
capital no
largest
necesita
economies,
ser rescatado.
60 of the
El
main
Fondo
ones
Monetario
are
Internacional
companies.
también puso
The
a
IMF
disposición
as well
supuestamente para ir
allegedly
saliendo de la crisis por la
said that
pandemia,
in
de la
order
crisis
to
económica asociada
leave
a la
the
crisis
economic
sanitaria,
crisis or the
250
sanitary
mil
crisis,
millones de
it
dólares.
gave
Sin embargo,
$250
vienen con
billion
las
made
imposiciones de ajustes
available,
estructurales que bien
but it
conocemos en los
implies
90 que hicieron
structural
muchísimo daño, al menos a la región latinoamericana.
adjustments that
Y
are
todo
so
esto, por supuesto,
harmful
también
to
tiene un
our
corte de
region as
género
well.
bien
And you
importante,
can see that
¿no?
the gender aspect is very
Los
much
salarios
included
más
here as well.
bajos
The lowest
los seguimos teniendo
salaries
las mujeres. A
are
nivel global,
still
la
for
brecha
women at
salarial
a
es de
global
16%
level. level, there is a 16% gap. In our region, it's larger than that, but 16% is the world level. More than half of the people who will be at extreme poverty after the crisis at a world level, most of them are women. In the most economically affected areas, most of the employees affected are women. The increase in the violence indexes, household violence, as well as public violence, and these processes of, let's say, police controlling states. What I mean by that is state controlling mobilizations or demonstrations to prevent violence, but that actually mobilize us all.
Todo esto hace que en este contexto de captura las mujeres seamos particularmente afectadas por esta crisis económica y por también esta imposibilidad de movilizarnos, ¿no? En este momento. Entonces, combatir la captura del Estado es un tema feminista y lo digo siempre, es el problema estructural más grande desde mi humilde perspectiva que enfrentamos dentro del capitalismo, es lo que nos está impidiendo, así como hemos hablado durante décadas del techo de cristal, ¿no? Con el que topamos las mujeres. Este es el techo de cristal para que los derechos humanos sean efectivos para todos y todas, para poder realmente cambiar de fondo la dinámica de este capitalismo salvaje en el que vivimos, ¿no? Para, digamos, lograr desarticular esta impunidad corporativa, este enorme poder del capital y redistribuir la riqueza, ¿no? Entonces, creo que como mensaje final ya para cerrar, y podemos seguir discutiendo después en lo que sigue, estos son algunos ejemplos concretos de cómo la captura se ha manifestado específicamente en el contexto de la pandemia, pero cómo se manifiesta en general, y las cosas que como feministas podemos estar observando y pensando para buscar estas formas creativas, como decía Cori, de movilizarnos en este contexto, ¿no? Estas son dinámicas globales y entonces nuestra lucha también tiene que ser global y articulada. Y bueno, por ahí lo dejaría, Ale, y seguimos conversando después. Muchas gracias.
You have the floor now, and we keep on talking afterwards. Thank you, Fernanda, for bringing really clear examples that sometimes are subtle, but sometimes they are very explicit. And I hope we do not normalize these ways of corporate capture and that we can make them visible. And what you were telling us, what is lawful, and being able to go forward, and the social forum that was going to take place in Barcelona, and this virtual way, it's an effort we made in July and now in November, and we are seeing that the movement went beyond this enclosure, and we use the virtual aspects in order to keep on with this strategy. This forum is vital, and there are greater and more and more events, and it's going to close tomorrow. I see that there are some people that are writing messages. I call upon questions. Please make questions. This is the second, during this webinar where we've been listening to Corina and seeing those images, I would like you to take at least 1 minute to think in your territories how this corporate power, this advancement, this corporate capture is happening. We're not going to be able to share it visually. You won't be able to open your microphones, but I would like you to take a pen and a paper, and I would like you to think, well, this that Corina or Fernanda shared, is this happening in my country? Is this happening in my territory, in my region? Because even though we're not going to be able to listen to you, you can leave your reflections in the chat. This school keeps on proposing debates and ways to reconnect with you, and it would be good for us as Dawn and the panelists who are here to see which are the concerns that arise from these debates and which are the materials that we can upload based on your concerns. During this thoughts and these reflections. And one of the topics Corina was talking about, that was the settlement issues. I would like to ask Bettina, who is a colleague, Bettina Müller. She is a comrade that is also in TNI. She is in Berlin, and she was one of the creators of the anti-G20 tent, together with other social movements and other colleagues. But I would like Bettina to introduce herself and to bring a case. Bettina, because of your work, because of this work that you're performing within this campaign, how this became visible, how this corporate power became visible. And thank you for being here with us, and thank you for having offered your time as well. Hi, Ale. It's so nice to see you. Can you hear me properly? Okay. So thank you for the invitation. As you see here, I am with my lights on because it's 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and at 5 o'clock in winter, it's the night. It's practically the evening, so it's dark outside. It's cold, and it's not a very good weather outside, but I'm very excited for being able to speak here to you. I'm not going to speak about my work, that is what I do every day here, that has to do with settlements and settlement courts and these treaties of trade. We have the opportunity to lead these states to certain special courts which are designed exclusively for them. And I saw that several colleagues with whom we share the experience between the fight against the G20 in 2018. But I'm going to speak about Germany especially, because I've been living here again for 2 years. And we mentioned Amazon a lot and other German companies. And I would like to bring several examples on how this package, let's say, this corporate package is presented in Germany against work in a country such as Germany, where we always say, okay, labor rights are great, are fantastic. Well, it's not like that. As Fernanda said, Amazon is one of the companies that was greatly benefited by the pandemic, unlike any other. Just to give you some data, in Germany, that company makes 10 billion euros a year. And they have 13 centers where they package their products, and they have lots of fixed employees and several temporary workers as well. In any of these centers, compliance centers, they are called compliance centers because workers are all the time complying there. In any of them, they pay the agreed salary for this sector. But since 2013, workers started going on strike so as to claim for greater salaries. During these 7 years, Amazon didn't give greater salaries in spite of the 300 days of strike during these 7 years. Today, we have a great number in Germany of workers that are part of unions, but Amazon in the world is known because it has an anti-union policy and because it harasses its workers and because it inflicts fear. And how are they doing this? I think this is very interesting, and that is why I bring this example. I think that Amazon is an emblematic case. This is how it works in Germany and at a global level in terms of the control of the workers, and many other companies are taking this example so as to surveil and optimize, this is how they call it, the work of their employees. So what is it that they do? They use technology, for instance, what they call hand screening. That is something that they have to take with them, and each step that you conduct during the labor process has to be registered through this hand screening. And this is something that happened in Leipzig, which is a city to the south of Berlin where I live. There was a colleague where for 1 minute she did not register what she was doing, and she was called by the managers, and they told her that if she was not working well, they were going to dismiss her, because there are lots of workers who are not working under a contract of employment, so they can be very easily dismissed, and they exert greater pressure on the people who are working for the company. They have a system that is called underperformance and top performance. They control performance all the time, and you are all the time competing with the rest of the people with whom you're working. One of the directors of this center, Leipzig, said that friendliness, it's not allowed in Amazon, and they are doing all what is in their hands so as to avoid the workers, or to prevent workers from speaking between them, so as to prevent any kind of organizations, and they want to prevent them from creating solidarity, and this can lead people to be dismissed from work. There are cases in Amazon and in companies, delivery companies, such Deliveroo, I think it's called in Argentina, where workers who started unionizing and who started organizing strikes were dismissed from works. And during this time, during coronavirus pandemic, there were cases in which in the compliance centers, but Amazon didn't care at all. There were not face masks for the workers that were working there, and they did not close down those centers. Sometimes there are buses or that pick these workers up, and these buses were full, so people were very unprotected, and there were lots of complaints. But it's a company that has a great turnover, millions and millions of euros on a monthly basis, could not even provide face masks to their workers. It is quite sad, but it's also a sign they do not care about the workforce they employ in these compliance centers. Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt you because we have other questions. We have to wrap up. Okay. And the last thing, just for you to have to be clear about this labor pressure, 20% of these workers in average are sick in Germany. So this is for you to see what this stress and this way of life and labor pressure implies. Thank you, Bettina. And I think that your reflection had a greater impact, and many other people started asking questions. Here I have some questions. I will take one or two or three, and then we're going to give the floor to Flora as well for another case. One of the questions was a comrade from Colombia. She wants to know whether there is a relationship between the big companies and the organized groups and state capture. And she is a comrade who comes from Colombia, and she has this concern because this has been a very dangerous country for defenders of environmental rights. We have another comrade that asked whether there is a mark, a brand, let's say, on the effects on the rights of women. I think that we have already mentioned that, but we can say which is the impact on women and girls of this state capture. And the third question, before giving the floor to Flora so as to go on with other questions from Bolivia, she is asking whether the economic and productive options for women publish or promote entrepreneurship, and it does not contemplate social security or health, and which are the options that we have so as to propose a different rhetoric. That is this gender question, this relationship between the state captor and these organized groups, and the narrative of entrepreneurship. I don't know, Corina and Fernanda, whether any of you would like to answer so as to then give the floor to Flora. I could say two or three things. The first one, as to the Colombian comrade, I don't know specific studies. There must be, but I don't know them, that look together at the organized armed groups and corporate capture, but we carried out a work done on illicit flow funds, and it was the flows derived from these types of illegal activities such as arms traffic and human trafficking as well. The money that came from those activities was circulating via the same circuits and the same mechanisms and devices that the task evasion. So I think there is a joint aspect between these aspects, that is the road of the money, So that is what we need to follow so as to show evidence, and so that those networks can become more visible. As to the gender aspect, I think that the way to understand the gender dimension of corporate capture is to think on the local areas, because it operates in a place where women and girls, in order to guarantee their rights, are in a disadvantaged positions. And when we mercantilize the access to the goods and services that we need to satisfy our desires, which is what happens with corporate advance, the women and girls, because of their position, are deprived of their rights. And the criticism to entrepreneurship in the literature of feminism, we started criticizing entrepreneurship. We think that it is a solution proposal, let's say, to difficulties that women face to develop economic activities or economic businesses, and it leaves women aside again. So, because even though women have certain conditions, these initiatives of entrepreneurship, of micro businesses improve the lives of these women. It doesn't help them to go out of the poverty cycle and survivorship economy. So we need to have a critical vision on this type of perspectives, and the discussion has to do with the development models and which are the implications that these models have on the generation of economic opportunities and for whom are those opportunities available. And we also need to take into consideration that the employment is not the only way through which we can have access to income. States have to guarantee the access to basic necessities, to basic incomes, because the level of inequality is such that we do not need to force people to work in employments or in jobs that do not exist in order to have access to an income. So we need to exert pressure on redistribution mechanisms. And there was a question from Diego Russo from Argentina, from a case from Argentina that I will take it in the next round. Yes, thank you, Corina. We are going to have another question and answer round. Fernanda, regarding those questions
sí, muy rápido. Específicamente sobre el tema de Colombia y grupos armados y demás, pues no tengo ninguna investigación a la mano sobre el caso colombiano como tal, pero sí coloqué en el chat un link a un estudio que hicimos colectivo, varias organizaciones en México, coordinado por la iniciativa de justicia de OSF, que se llama Corrupción que Mata, y una de las cosas que analiza también es, digamos, esta relación muy cercana entre Estado, crimen organizado y corporaciones en varios territorios de México. Entonces ahí les dejo por si quieren echarle un ojo como referencia. Y lo otro sobre la marca de género en temas de captura, cuando los estados se retiran y digamos dejan de hacer su trabajo como sujetos garantes y como entes reguladores y se desmantelan también, por ejemplo, las políticas sociales, ahí las mujeres somos las primeras afectadas, ¿no? Y eso lo sabemos de primera mano. Entonces creo que ahí podemos en otro momento compartir datos específicos.
We can share this more
specifically.
I talked about some of the aspects, but I think that we should bear this in mind. What happens when the state leaves, and what happens when the capital power interferes in those spaces? It is always against us, you know, more violence against us, more informal economy, more care on our shoulders, more violence against us. So that was a general comment. I don't know whether we are going to address the rest of the questions later on. Yes, and also because there are some questions about the pandemic in particular. So we invite all of you to have a look at our website, first of all, because we had the first dialogue, I can't remember the date, but about care and what was happening with people working with care during the pandemic. So it was one of the first dialogues within this framework that we conducted. So there are a lot of voices that are gathered here with fresh ideas and opinions about what's going on. So now I would like to give the floor to Flora Parteño, who is also a member of the board of DON, and she's also the coordinator of my team, social mobilization team. She has been leading many procedures, and she's one of the founders of this convergence, feminist convergence, together with other organizations within the World Social Forum for Transforming Economies. So Flora, I'm going to give the floor to you so that you can resume the work or make some comments on the work done on labor rights. I think you had a presentation, or you just have the floor. Go ahead. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to see some of your faces. Many people I haven't seen for some time. Fernanda, Corina, thanks, Ale. So, indeed, I would like to focus On the last intervention that Bettina did in Berlin and the labor conditions, the Amazon workers are actually suffering a lot. And I would like to make the Latin suffering, though the Latin comparison, let's say, from the similar. I'm sorry, there's a dog barking. They want to be resistant, so they are barking. Okay. Mercado Libre is the equivalent here in Argentina. What Mercado Libre did was to show that they can work as a kind of octopus, gathering all the e-wallet market, payments market, deliveries market. And I wanted to mention two more things related to what Fernanda said before. Just wait 1 second that I can hush the dog. Okay, so the ways in which state capture occur is by means of capturing the narration, the narrative, as well as the interference in the decision-making processes. I think that the way in which Mercado Libre expanded here, in Argentina at least, could you just give me 1 second? That's it. In the way in which Mercado Libre expanded in Argentina was related to the preparation of the legal ground. In Congress, in the last administration, Macri's administration, which was a government with neoliberal policies, we got in debt with the IMF, very strong debt, they voted a law with a lot of lobby of these companies. They are the unicorn companies. I talk about Mercado Libre, but there's also software or the knowledge or software companies. They fostered a law in 2019, the technology or software law, where they had great tax benefits. They operated in a deregulation area, and what it implied was that Mercado Libre could manage to expand very easily in the last few years. And in the context of the pandemic, it's one of the large winners, not only because they control a large market of payments, e-wallets, it's a kind of ecosystem, I should say, but also because there are very strong tensions with the unions that defend their workers. I would like to mention two. One that is very much related to what Bettina said, those who are working in the storage houses, the logistic parts, because they don't have any health regulations or the packaging, the distribution part, and making the whole machinery work. The Mercado Libre implies that you will receive the package you asked for at home. There is a lot of dispute there because they prefer to locate themselves in areas where the bargaining agreements are favorable to them. And in the case of workers that are not called workers, because of what we just said, Mercado Libre has fostered the narrative of cooperation or cooperative economy. So you have users if facing a computer trying to find a product, and you have the people who deliver those products. So they are contractors, freelancers, entrepreneurs who have their own small online shops, so they don't have a proper store, but online, and they try to market their products online. So cooperative economy destroys the working conditions, and it allows these mega marketplaces to expand without any kind of accountability from a labor rights point of view, any social protection laws. And that's why, with this understanding of it, a feminist understanding of the inequality that this implies for women in the service sector mainly, women working from home, selling online, there is a large percentage for whom this is their main income. And this income implies no social protection, no licenses, and Mercado Libre doesn't need to respond as an employer because it's a cooperation platform, so anyone can sell and buy there. And this is a business model that hides the labor relation. And whenever there is a dispute because of the union or backed by the union, as it happens with the financial sector, with the bank sector, those workers who are operating with e-wallets, they are out they're outside any legal bargaining agreement, so they are not protected by any agreement. That's all I'm going to say. And with Rosa, my dog, we say hi to everyone and thank you for the space. Rosa is always attending our seminars, so let her speak, let her bark. So I can see that there are some colleagues writing messages in the chat box. So great that you can meet each other again and talk to each other. You know that the COVID has some positive parts. This is one. So there is a second round of questions. I would like to pose these questions to you and then give the floor to Nancy. She's based in Zimbabwe. She has been listening to the whole of these presentations, and I want to make the most of her presence here. There was a specific question in terms of the impact on migrating people. What Flora mentioned before, platform work, or what Bettina and Fernanda said before, cases in Berlin, in Mexico. So is there anything else to add about migrating people, migrants, and how they can rule, like a government can rule against or in favor of them, or is this group always attacked during the COVID pandemic? And then there are some questions related to the materials. So for example, recommended materials to read, or this idea of entrepreneurship. So I invite everyone, if you want, I don't know, to make a recommendation, if you have any comments from your organizations, there is a lot of information and it's great to be able to share this. And then finally, a question about advocacy, impact, incidents, which are the areas of resistance. And I think that Nancy can resume this topic at the end. So, any readings recommended to face or to challenge this view? Social strategies or anything specific related to migrants? And finally, the resistance. There are more questions coming our way. Okay, whoever wants to take the floor to start. Fernanda, anyone else?
Sí, si quieres rápido. Había varias cuestiones sobre la renta básica. Por ejemplo, había una pregunta y pues volvemos a lo mismo, ¿no? Hay intereses muy fuertes en que de repente no se aprueben estas políticas de renta básica en muchos países, ¿no? Pero liquidez hay y a finales de junio, creo es el último dato que yo tengo de 2020, en los mercados globales había una liquidez de 12 trillones de dólares y eso significa que hay enormes cantidades de dinero circulando que nos permiten comprar y vender y por lo tanto nos permitirían a nivel global, con una redistribución mucho más equitativa, una distribución más equitativa, es decir, redistribución, alcanzar fácilmente rentas básicas para los
to actually
7.000
reach
millones de personas
the
que somos,
possibility
¿no?
of making
Globalmente.
all people
Entonces,
in the
bueno,
world be able to
por lo
have
menos en
income,
la
money,
población
and
económicamente
so
activa,
I
para
mean,
usar un término
an economically active population, so as
clásico,
to use
digamos, ¿no? Entonces
the
esa
right
es una
term.
cosa bien importante, ¿no?
But that's something
Y también
important
tiene
to
que
bear
ver
in
con
mind. And
lo de
also,
respecto de los migrantes, pues sí es
in
uno
terms
de
of
los grupos
migrants,
vulnerables, ¿no?
yes, they are a vulnerable group
Sabemos
indeed.
que el derecho a migrar es un derecho que
The
ha
right
estado
to
mermado de alguna
migrate
manera, ¿no? Que
is
hay
a
muchas
right that
dificultades
has
en que
not
muchos de
been
los estados
ensured.
regulen
Many
los estatus
states regulate
migratorios de estas personas que
the
se mueven en los territorios
migration status
y por lo tanto también están expuestos
of those people.
a trabajos más
They're
precarios y a una
exposed
mayor
to more
vulnerabilidad.
precarious
Y finalmente sobre los
works
espacios
or
de
jobs.
incidencia que por ahí preguntaba
And in
alguna de
terms
las
of
colegas,
incidents or
como
impact,
feministas
as some
en
of
lo
you
global,
were
pero también en lo
asking,
regional y
and
en lo
from a
nacional,
feminist point of view and a
hay
regional point
distintos
of view as
espacios. El
well,
proceso del Tratado Vinculante a Naciones Unidas
there
es
is a
uno donde
binding
podemos estar las feministas tratando de que se
documents
incorpore
in
una
the UN
perspectiva de
trying to
género
make
en
feminists
el
lobbying
desarrollo de
so
este
as to make a
instrumento
feminist
para
view
regular el actor de las
included
empresas,
in,
sobre todo del
at least
capital
in the drafting
transnacional.
of this
Hay otros
document.
en
There are
a
other
nivel
documents,
latinoamericano,
and
la
for
Comisión
example, at a
Interamericana
Latin
de Derechos
American
Humanos,
level,
por ejemplo, ha
the Inter-American
desarrollado
Commission
unos
for Human
lineamientos
Rights
sobre el
has
tema de
developed
empresas y derechos humanos desde
guidelines
los cuales
in terms of
podemos
companies
también buscar
so
espacios de
that we
incidencia para ver
can
cómo
try
se
to have an
implementan en nuestros
impact there
países,
as well and
pero
try to
también es
see
muy
how our
importante la
countries
incidencia
can
a nivel
position
nacional
themselves,
para que
and
se
also at a
mejoren las
national level,
regulaciones,
it is
¿no?
very important to
Y también la
improve
incidencia con
the
respecto a los tratados
regulations
de comercio e
and
inversión.
the
Ese
impact
es un
on
espacio
the
donde los
investment
estados
and
están
trade
cediendo
agreements.
soberanía y donde tenemos algo
States
que
are are giving away sovereignty in this case, and we have something to say in this regard. We don't want the states to lose their capacity there in those areas, or not to continue protecting our rights as citizens. I know we're running out of time. I will not continue speaking. Ale, just one more thing to add. I will not going to react on what Fernanda has already reacted, but there was a question in the previous round. A colleague from Argentina was asking about Vicentin company in Argentina. Just for the Argentines to know, it's a company that has used all these mechanisms that the corporate power uses in order to avoid taxes or to pay less or to leak currency to foreign countries. And the government tried to expropriate it, but they only pretended or gave one step into the process of expropriating it. And there was a popular demonstration defending the company. So the question is, what happens with the civil society resistance? That is a very good example of what Fernanda was saying, the capturing the narratives. That's why I mentioned this, because during this manifestation, the demonstration in favor of the company, there was a strong image, a picture of a car with people from that neighborhood supporting the company. The car was so old, very, it's a Renault 12, for those who know what I'm talking about. And they had a post saying, "We are all Vicentin." And that image is the representation, the graphic representation of the narration, the narrative capture by the corporation. I think that part of the difficulty that we currently have in order to articulate our resistance is to face those narrations that make us think that, yes, we are all Byzantine, we are part of Byzantine, we need to defend it. These are the companies that are giving us jobs instead of expropriating our jobs, our times, our bodies. And this is a narration that we need to focus on and to challenge. Before giving the floor to Nancy, we mentioned migrants, and Bettina, they were asking you whether the people affected in Amazon, Germany are mainly migrants. Yes. Yes. Indeed, those who are not working with a legal contract in Germany are mainly migrants who are working in more precarious situations. And during the pandemic in Germany, the ones who got fired the most are migrants as well. I know that you mentioned this before, but I would like to add something else. Amazon is a case where they have a lot of migrants employed, but there are other apps or platform work. Helpling is another app for people to clean houses, where the amount of migrants is even greater and their situation is even more precarious than the one they have in Amazon. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Bettina. And the question of people migrating or migrants is very strong. And now we're going to write here in the chat box the Feminist School website, and we're going to upload material there that is becoming more and more relevant. In Dawn, we are also giving the first few steps with a new colleague that is going to be working on this topic in particular. So we will enrich the bibliography on this. Now I would like to give the floor to Nancy Kachingwe. She's in Harare with 5 hours difference from here. So I know that you might have like electricity problems, Nancy. I hope you're online and it will last and say like that. She's a personal friend of us for years. She has been working for years, a lot, and Also participating in these debates that we've been fostering for the last 4 years at a regional level, at a world level. She has a lot of experience in issues related to feminist studies, development in her region, in Africa, as well as worldwide. So we asked her to listen to everything. She had the translations so that she could listen to the whole of these presentations. So we would love it if she can make a brief summary of, let's say, for example, Nancy, what do you think are the main topics that are the strongest topics addressed? Or maybe you can just give us your reflection upon everything you've been listening to. Welcome indeed, and you have the floor.
Hi, Ale. Thank you very much. Thanks so much for inviting me. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, good. Okay. Thanks so much for inviting me. I was a bit worried that I would have to go through quite a lot of concentrating on listening to Spanish. And being an English speaker, I'm very spoiled because quite often we end up being the sort of dominant language and don't get used to listening to interpretation. But I'd just like to say thank you to the interpreters because I heard everything. The reason why I missed especially the question and answer sessions was because my power system failed, but the generator's on, so we should be okay for this. So thanks so much for the presentations, and I just really like to try and sum up and maybe put forward some issues, not issues for further discussion, but rethink and try and summarize what the some of things that we can continue to discuss further down the line. So I really did pick up, and I'm very much into the whole question of narratives. But in addition to narratives, also framing, how do we describe and understand our problems beyond particular campaigns, which are all very important that we are leading? How do we frame our problems? So one of the first things I think we should think about is who or what is the economy? We talk quite a lot about women's unpaid care work, but if we ask ourselves the question, who or what is the economy? When people talk about we must rescue the economy, where are we not part of that economy? Is our labor not part of the economy? Is our reproductive labor not part of the economy? And why is the economy defined as certain actors and it excludes others? Another question is again to ask, when we talk about corporate capture, what is being captured and from whom? So corporate capture, I agree with Fernanda's point that corporate capture is also about state capture. But what is then the purpose of capturing the state? And a lot of the purpose of, so if we understand corporate capture and state capture as an imperialist project to capture control of all resources, including labor, including natural resources, water, air, everything, then we start to understand what the neoliberal project is. And when we build our strategies and our resistance and who we need to connect with and ally with, then we kind of see what we are trying to resist. And if we look at things from a more sort of imperialist framing, corporate capture, which is what imperialism was about, or what the imperial project was about, was in order to capture control over as many resources for production and then to extract and accumulate along the way. A third question is around labor and women's labor and the gendered nature of labor, and understanding labor, well, one of the things I always say is, why is it that all work is labor, but not all labor is work? And so why do we have these distinctions, particularly when it comes to women's labor, that it's excluded from being considered as work? And what are the mechanisms that are brought into play, the tools, the narratives, the technologies that are brought into play to make sure that we can take out 1/2 of people's unpaid labor and say it's of no value, and then only count other types of labor, which even now we are saying that's of less and less value to the system. And when we talk about migrants and the valuing of labor and creating hierarchies of what is real work and what is not real work, the ways in which gender and race come into those equations of constructing this corporate capture model come into play. I just want to refer to someone says they can't hear translation.
Yeah,
okay?
but yeah, don't worry, don't worry.
I'll just carry on. Okay.
Yes.
And again, so this corporate capture is not just a phenomenon; it's a project. Okay, it's a project. It started a long time ago. They've carried on. It is interesting that there has been the amount of resistance to that project, in the sense that unions are still there, mobilization is still there, resistance is still there, but there is very clearly a project in terms of shredding labor rights. But shredding labor rights, because labor is the one thing we all have as a resource to be able to gain our livelihoods. So even if you don't have a house and you don't have a bank account, you still have your labor. So shredding labor rights is is one of the most important and key pieces of taking the entire human rights framework apart anyways. Because fine, we can go and vote every 5 years, we go and vote every 5 years. We understand that that is not power. So protecting labor rights and valuing labor rights is one of the most fundamental aspects of the human rights framework. And therefore, it's important to sort of see this binding treaty and corporate accountability around human rights as being very critical to keeping the human rights framework intact, because there's not just a corporate attack on labor rights. The intention is to undo the entire human rights framework altogether. There are some rhetorical issues. So I know, as we listen to everything that Fernanda and Corina and Bettina were describing, there's the sort of corporate capture, there's the state capture. Now, if it was any country in the global south, we know we just call it corruption, straight up, no problem. We don't even need to find new words. It's a global model. We apply corruption selectively to call it just as how dictators come from one side of the world and not from the other. Corruption happens in certain parts of the world and not the others. And so, but one of the things that's problematic around that is that it separates our struggles. So things that are happening that are bad in Amazon, which we can clearly see from the global south, that this is just corruption, slavery, exploitation. There's a sort of like, it's not happening here. So there is a certain, I don't know, maybe Bettina can talk about it further. There is a certain denialism that what's happening over here in the north, what's happening in the north is different from what's happening in the south, but it's all the same thing. The only problematic issue around using terms like corruption is it focuses on the state to further delegitimize the state and say states don't function. So corporate capture and state capture are useful even in our context to also point to the corporate sector as major, as that it's not just the state that's the problem, it's also this whole big corporate project. So finally, maybe just to say, you know, this what we're looking at is a new business model. This is the new way of doing business. It comes up in different ways across the world, but it is the new business model. I think in many ways, a lot of what part of the idea has been actually abolish the notion of a worker altogether, abolish the idea of an employer altogether. We go from being employed to being self-employed, to being self-commoditizing. So it's like, how can we get people to commoditize themselves? And then we all have to go and sell ourselves, sell our labor individually on the market, in one way or the other, in this sort of new neoliberal architecture that is even sort of further, in which our labor can be captured quite often via, you know, other means which are now just technology. So now Amazon is not an employer. It does have workers, but it extracts a lot of labor from other places beyond its workers invisibly, in order to create those billions. And so we completely divorce the billions that Jeff Bezos makes. It's made out that it's him who was doing all that work, and we make invisible all the different labor of how those billions could be accumulated by one person who somehow is just so hardworking that he can earn an extra 10 billion in the course of a pandemic. So I just wanted to put those kind of, I hope that's a little bit of helping to frame and think through some of what we need to do in terms of our struggles moving forward. But I think it's really important to frame things well, so that as we connect our issues and our struggles, we see the connections. One tiny example, it's more from South Africa, but this is the Amazon model, where there's been this argument around what's called the labor brokers. So in fact, I'll just take an example from down the road. When my son, at the school where my son was at, had workers there. They had stayed there for over some 20 years or so. You know, they had the normal labor benefits, pensions, and then they just decided it was far too expensive. I think someone in the school said, look, I can make it cheaper for you. I have a company where I hire workers and cleaners, and they will just come and you sign a contract with us so that we can be the people who you pay, and we will deal with the workers. And so, I mean, a lot of parents were very upset by that, but the school looked at its plus and minuses, and simply said, yeah, we'd rather outsource the cleaning of the school, which is quite a wealthy school, by the way. We would rather outsource the cleaning of the school to this company and not be bothered with the maybe 15, 20, 30 workers that we have to directly hire and deal with. And one can imagine what the situation for workers from that company that are cleaning is going to be. That's the business model, the Amazonization and Uberization, and that's what we need to be fighting against. Thanks.
Gracias, Nancy.
Thank you, Nancy.
Voy a cambiar a...
I'm going to change the channel. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you for your capacity, not only to highlight these the important issues of this session, but also to bring these examples. And we need this transnational vision and perspective. Thank you, Bettina, that she joined in the last minute, and she brought a case from Europe. We are closing. We've been 2 hours. We've been talking for 2 hours in this classroom. We apologize for the logistic issues. We are learning in this virtual world. In Dawn, we created our first school of feminist economy in 2018. It was presential. It had that force of the movements that were in the streets, and the school became energized. And after COVID and the isolation, we started learning on how this school could go on and could inspire in the force of social movements, especially within the social forum of transformative economies and learning which are the best tools and assessing the costs and privileging translation with the colleagues from Habla Palabra. And I'm really sorry for these issues we had, and I would like to reinforce that the things that we have shared, we're already sharing, we're already registering that, and you can visit our webpage, our Dawn page, where we are going to keep on adding readings for these topics that appear here, these migrant people affected, that I think that it appeared, and it's a very strong topic. And I would like to also say that we will have a systematization uploaded, and the video that you couldn't see today as well. You have to be patient with us. We have multiple agendas and multiple jobs, and the colleagues that share their vision. So I also are resistant in many areas, and we are also here. We have also here one colleague, Paulina Paves from Chile. She was saying that it's important to talk about indigenous community, and yes, it's very important. You are of course going to have the second and third and fourth part as well. I know that last time we turned on cameras, and I wanted to ask Fernanda, Corina, Flora, Tasmi, and Nancy, and I don't know if if the platform allows us all to turn on the cameras. I would like to thank you for your patience, for your collaboration, because we do this because of the political confidence and trust we have between organizations, friends, and that is why we can carry out these workshops. And we have almost 60 people during 2 hours. A round of applause for all of us. Okay, thank you. I would like to thank you so much. We are still connected. I would like Flora to write the email there. So if you have messages for the school, we have an email address for Dawn. And I would like to thank you. And tomorrow we are closing the social forum of Transformative Economies. Nancy will be there. Flora will be there. Silvia Federici, comrades from Rodney. We have regular people as me, that Fernanda is going to be there as well, and comrades who were translating, Laura and Melissa, Tasmi, who is in the backstage, Vicky, Marla. Thank you very much, and a big hug to all of you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Gracias.
Thanks, Nancy.
Abrazos.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
See you tomorrow.
Yes. I'll get my...
What feminists, what we do to ourselves, Nancy? What do we do? And you didn't mention the festival.
I put it in the thing, but I forgot.
Okay.
Yes, I put it in the chat, but
we
it's
will
okay.
make sure
I'll do that
to socialize the Feminist Futures Festival.
I was embarrassed because we didn't. Yeah, I was embarrassed because we didn't have all the Spanish stuff up, but I'll put it up and you'll have it tomorrow.
Don't worry. We know that it's all
Okay.
voluntary work also. Un abrazo, gracias, chicas.
Take care, guys. Lovely. Thank you everyone. Fantastic. Well done.
Bye.
Bye.